Good morning, bonjour à tous. Proud this morning to be here on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Nation. And before we begin, as New Democrats, we want to think of the women murdered at École Polytechnique, their families, the sacrifice, and the commitment that we need to make as Canadians to make sure that this kind of horrific violence against women and girls will never, ever be perpetrated again. So Prime Minister Trudeau goes to COP26 and makes a series of dramatic announcements to increase the targets that Canada had promised at Paris. But what he didn't tell the world is that the government has failed to meet any of the previous promises that he has made. In fact, the Environment Commissioner clearly wasn't buying the COP26 sales pitch because he blasted the Liberals for going from, quote, failure to failure in missing key climate change targets. The Liberals don't seem to understand that unless there is a clear financial commitment that includes workers and their families, Canada will continue to fail on the climate front. Concrete commitments to workers through investments in new clean energy and infrastructure projects will be key to meeting our targets. And it is even more essential for the government to utilize the skills of Canadian energy workers in order to build trust in this so-called just transition. We compare with Joe Biden, who went to COP26, where he promised massive financial investments in clean energy that is tied to what Joe Biden calls good paying union jobs. We have had no such language from the Prime Minister. What we did get were promises backed by a record of failure. For example, Mr. Trudeau at COP26 promised to decrease methane emissions by 75%. And yet his government isn't close to meeting their previous target of 45%. And what makes this so unacceptable is that the technology is available to drop methane emissions to near zero. The only thing we're missing right now, it appears, is political spine. Mr. Trudeau at COP26 promised an emissions cap on greenhouse gas emissions. So where is that cap? When does it start? What does it include? These are the questions that we need answers to, because under his watch, emissions have continued to rise despite his positive rhetoric. Last week, Resource Minister Wilkinson told the House that Canada's environment record was the envy of the G7. This is simply not true. Since Trudeau made his promises at Canada, according to the Environment Commissioner, Canada has become the worst performer in the G7 nation. So why is this? Well, consider this. Right now, we are at the very bottom of the G20 when it comes to investments in renewable energy. We are down there with Russia and Saudi Arabia. So without those investments, we are never going to make our targets. And this brings us to the heart of the problem that's confronting Canada today. Because as an energy producing nation, we cannot allow ourselves to be at the back of the pack when it comes to investing in clean tech. Over the last 4 years, we have seen major investment firms, insurers, and bondholders announcing that they are pulling out of Canada's energy sector because of the lack of action on climate change. So is this how Prime Minister Trudeau will manage the transition? By a steady bleed off of investment and jobs. It is unconscionable that the government is failing to work with energy workers on transforming our economy to meet the challenges it faces, the urgent challenges we face right now. So what needs to be done? Well, the RBC has pegged the price of investments at $57 billion a year in clear and targeted investments. Clean Energy Canada states that the task will require Canada to undertake a massive investment in renewable energy. But the upside of this massive spending is that it will create 200,000 jobs, as compared to the situation now where we're just watching the bleed off of jobs. We're here this morning as New Democrats to say we will stand up for Canadian workers and the environment and at putting in place a plan to address catastrophic climate change. We will reach out our hand to the government and work with them because the stakes are so high. But to do this, the Prime Minister needs to understand that spin will not cut it. We need to work on a serious investment plan with commitments to make this change a reality. Le Premier ministre s'est rendu à la COP26 afin d'annoncer des engagements dramatiques pour augmenter les objectifs que le Canada avait promis à Paris. Mais la réalité est claire. Le Canada n'a pas répondu aux objectifs de Paris. À Glasgow, M. Trudeau promet des normes plus strictes pour diminuer les gaz à effet de serre, mais les émissions continuent d'augmenter. Alors, que faut-il faire? Le NPD exige que le gouvernement mette en place un plan des investissements pour le développement des énergies renouvelables. M. Trudeau doit s'engager envers les travailleurs du secteur de l'énergie et à utiliser leurs compétences pour assurer la transition vers une nouvelle économie énergétique. La réponse à la crise climatique doit être basée sur la collaboration avec les travailleurs, les travailleuses et leurs familles. Et c'est nécessaire pour le gouvernement de mettre en place un plan des investissements massifs pour le Canada devient un leader dans la lutte pour la justice climatique. I will turn it over to my colleague from Edmonton now.
Thank you, Charlie. Thank you all for being here today. My name is Heather McPherson, and I am the Member of Parliament for Edmonton Strathcona. And I have to tell you that what I have been fighting for in the House of Commons since I have been elected is a strong future for Alberta. Alberta is facing a dual crisis. And this is a crisis that we have been seeing coming down the road for a very, very long time. And that crisis is a climate crisis, a climate emergency, but also an economic crisis. Unlike any other region of this country, Alberta is facing an economic devastation if we do not do what needs to be done to invest in our workers. If we do not do what needs to be done to invest in a new economy for Alberta. You know, I am a proud Albertan. My dad was a trucker. I grew up with oil and gas workers sitting around my kitchen table. And I can tell you that those oil and gas workers, they helped build this country. Alberta contributed to the building of the Canadian economy to Canada. And we are now in a situation where if we do not invest, if we do not support those workers in Alberta, we will not be able to meet our climate targets. There is no ability for Canada to meet our climate targets, for Canada to reinvent itself in a new future-looking economy if we leave Alberta behind. And what I'm seeing from this federal government is a failure to invest in Alberta, a failure to invest to the scale and the scope that we need to ensure that the economy in Alberta can go forward, that workers in Alberta can use their skills and their expertise to build a new economy, and that Alberta doesn't get left behind. So I'm happy to take questions from you all today, but my fight in the House of Commons for the last 2 years and continues to be to get help for the workers of Alberta. And I want to thank Charlie Angus for all the incredible work he has done to push for this. Thank you.
Good morning, guys. David Aiken from Global News.
Good morning, David Aiken.
Morning, Charlie. Heather, I wonder if I can get you to put your foreign affairs critic hat on just for a bit. We had the news this morning that Ambassador Barton will leave his post as ambassador to China at the end of the year. And so that gives us an opportunity. I wonder if you have some thoughts about Ambassador Barton's time in China, and where do you see the government's handling of the relationship with China at this point?
Absolutely. Well, thank you for the question. And I think we, as Canadians, we all thank the ambassador for the work that he's done. Certainly his work getting the two Michaels back onto Canadian soil is wonderful, was wonderful news. However, you know, we still have Canadians that are being held hostage in China. And I think that the government has been weak on developing a plan for China, and I'd certainly like to see a stronger plan going forward to ensure that our relationship with China, you know, moves in the right direction. So I'll thank the ambassador for his work. I look forward to the next ambassador being announced, and hopefully a stronger, more coherent, more holistic plan on China.
Watching the Harper government over its decades struggle with the Chinese relationship, at first it sort of placed human rights, or seemed to place a more emphasis on human rights, democracy, rule of law. But by the end of that, it recognized that, particularly for Western Canada, a lot of stuff is sold to China, canola, energy products, and it's sort of tilted back towards a commercial relationship. It seems the Trudeau government started out that way too. It wants to do free trade with China, all sorts of things. So how do you find the balance? Would you tend to emphasize, you know, a country that is committing a genocide against Uyghurs over energy exports?
Well, you know, I think when we do that dichotomy, that's a bit of a mistake. Of course, we need to be looking at human rights issues. Of course, we have to act on the fact that there is a genocide happening right now in the world. We are a country that cherishes human rights, that cherishes the rule of international law. So having a genocide being perpetrated against people in this world means that Canada has to speak up against that, has to push on that. But we also have a number of tools within our toolbox. You know, we can be using soft diplomacy. We can be using a number of different tools to make sure that our relationship with China is productive and that we are bringing China back on the side of international law. And I'll also say, you know, Canada is a middle power. We clearly need to work with our allies. We clearly need to work with others in Europe, with our friends in the United States, to bring China back on that side of international law. That said, it's complex, and this is a complex issue, and it will require some very serious hard work by this government that I, to be perfectly honest, don't feel it has been accomplished.
Hi, it's Annie Bergeron-Oliver with CTV National News. My question is also for you, if that's okay, Ms. McPherson. I'm just going to follow up on David's question. The Americans are expected to announce today that they're going to have a diplomatic boycott of the Beijing Olympics. Do you think that this is something Canada should do as well?
I do, and there's a few reasons why I think we need to boycott, have a diplomatic boycott. Part of it is that, frankly, I'm banned from China. We have parliamentarians in our House of Commons that have been banned by the Chinese government. That means that if we did send a diplomatic mission, that China, in fact, is choosing who gets to go on that mission, because we have members of our House of Commons who have lost the ability to be part of that mission. That in and of itself, to me, is problematic. But also, I think that there is, you know, there's huge problems having the Olympics in Beijing, knowing that there's a genocide happening in that country, knowing that our government has voted unanimously and our opposition, our House of Parliament, has voted unanimously on that genocide. So I think that we need to send a message to Beijing that the world is watching, that the world is paying attention, that we are not going to allow this to go unchallenged.
Great. And second question, it can be for either one of you. The Finance Committee today is going to be looking at the new pandemic aid package that the government has proposed. Freeland is supposed to be up today talking about it. I know the NDP has said that they are not in favor of ending any of the pandemic benefits in this transition. I'm wondering what you want to hear from the Deputy Prime Minister today.
We certainly, the issue of how pandemic spending is taking place is a vital question for Canadians. This is something we need answers for. I'm really pleased that the Finance Committee is meeting, because the Prime Minister hasn't shown any willingness to have any of the other committee meetings come forward. The Deputy Prime Minister needs to send a message that the government understands that we are not out of COVID by any means at all. We are still seeing major uncertainty. I was just speaking with workers who work from home right now, who are in the travel agencies, travel business. Travel is being hit. Tourism is facing major hit. Restaurants are hanging by a thread. And we need to remember as well that many businesses have burned through their savings and their capital. So if we're hit by any further downturns come January, it will have a huge impact. The government has to do the heavy lifting to get people to the other side. I want to hear that the Deputy Prime Minister is willing to be there for Canadian workers and small business.
Hi, David Thurton from CBC News. I'm just help me understand this. So what is the path forward that you're proposing for workers? Are you proposing like a specific dollar amount that you'd like to see the government give to Alberta to support workers each year? Are you going to be proposing legislation? Do you see an opportunity through the Just Transition legislation the government has been promising to table and to have debates on? We haven't seen it. Can you specifically tell us what do you think the path forward here is?
When we recognize that Canada has fallen to the bottom of the G20, the very bottom on investments in renewables, and we are an energy producing nation, that is scandalous. That we are at the bottom of the G7 on dealing with our emissions targets. We're saying to the Prime Minister, you don't get to go to Paris and make grand pronouncements unless you have a clear plan. That clear plan must include workers, because it's about making the investments in the new energy economy. We have huge potential in Alberta with geothermal. We could be putting workers on the ground right now. Hydrogen in Edmonton, there's huge plans underway. Where is the federal government? So we're saying to the Prime Minister, he needs to be realistic. In order for us to get to a clean energy transition, it has to include workers. And one of the reasons that we're speaking up today on Alberta, but certainly for energy workers in Saskatchewan and Newfoundland as well, is that we have an incredible level of expertise in Canada's energy sector. So rather than fighting the old battles of the 20th century, why are we not using them, these workers and their skills for the 21st century? We haven't seen any of that kind of language from the Prime Minister. I challenge Seamus O'Regan, why don't you move to Calgary? If you're going to be the Labour Minister where the transition is already happening, set your office up in Calgary and start working with them now. Wilkinson, get out there to Edmonton and Fort Mac. Start working on the ground, because right now we're hearing talk, and talk's not getting us anywhere.
Okay. I wanted to ask both of you about a story that my colleague Kyle Bax has out. It's top of our website right now. It's about the federal government has begun developing regulations to allow oil sands sites to release basically treated tailings water back into, the environment, into the Athabasca River. What's your response to that? And what's your response, especially knowing that, these are huge tailings ponds and there are worries about the structural integrity. And if we just keep storing the water there, those worries about the structural integrity of that water is just going to grow. So what is your thoughts on that, given that the solution isn't just as easy as just saying, don't release the water?
Well, I think the issue here is that, certainly in the last year with the high price of gas, the oil companies have made extraordinary profits. We have 300 and some thousand abandoned orphaned wells in Alberta right now. We don't have a credible plan for the cleanup. We have huge tailings that will affect the Athabasca River. So if we're going to start talking about releasing water into the Athabasca River, we need to know that there is a strong financial commitment to total safety. Safety, number one. Environmental safety, number one. And these companies are responsible for that. To cry poor after making the kind of money they've made is not acceptable. I come from a region where we've seen devastation of waters. The Matachewan River from breaches and tailings dams. These tailing dams in northern Alberta are much larger. So the environmental cleanup we have to have a plan. And right now, I'm not feeling reassured that the government is saying, okay, we'll just release some water and we'll see, we hope for the best. These companies made the money. They have to put it back into the environment. Is that?
May I?
Yes.
Thank you, David. That's a great question. I met with Chief Adams from the Athabasca Fort Chip Nation just a little while ago, and imagine living downstream from those tailing ponds and what they are facing. Now, one of my big concerns has been that during COVID, water testing in that area was shut down. It was deemed too dangerous to do water testing in that area. Not too dangerous to continue to do, oil exploration and whatnot, but too dangerous to test the water. So there's a lot of problems with even just the way the process is being done. As Charlie said, we need to have these companies committing to do this as safely as possible and to reclaiming the spaces that are damaged, that there needs to be more effort being put into that. The companies know how to do this. We've been calling on the government time and time again when it comes to things like cleanup, that there are strings attached, that we are ensuring that the money is going to where it needs to go, that it is protecting workers, that it is protecting the environment. And time again, the government has failed to do that. The money goes to the CEOs. The cleanup doesn't happen. Everything is done at a much lower level of quality than we need to see. And frankly, for those living downstream of those tailings ponds, they have been calling for action on this. They have seen this train coming down the tracks for a very, very long time. And so the fact that we're in a situation now where we have not dealt with it for decades is a full failure on the behalf of both the Liberal and previous Conservative government.
Now I'll check on the phone. Operator, do we have a question on the phone?
Thank you. Merci. If you have a question and you're using a speakerphone, please lift your handset before making your selection. If you have a question, please press star 1 on the device's keypad. You may cancel your question at any time by pressing star 2. So please press star 1 at this time if you have a question. There will be a brief pause while the participants register. Nous allons maintenant prendre les questions du téléphone. Si vous utilisez le téléphone main libre, s'il vous plaît, soulevez le combiné avant d'effectuer votre sélection. Si vous désirez poser une question, veuillez s'il vous plaît appuyer sur les touches étoile 1 de votre appareil. Vous pouvez à tout moment annuler votre question en appuyant sur les touches étoile 2. Alors s'il vous plaît, appuyez sur étoile 1 maintenant pour poser une question. Il y aura un court délai vous permettant de vous enregistrer dans la file d'attente pour la période de questions. Merci de patienter. Once again, please press star 1 on the device's keypad if you have a question. De nouveau, n'hésitez pas à faire étoile 1 sur votre appareil pour toute question. There are no questions registered at this time on the phone. Il n'y a pas de questions en ce moment sous téléphone. I'll return the call back to the floor, de retour à la salle.
Can I just take a minute here and thank the hardworking journalists of Ottawa who came through that rotten weather this morning? We know who are the ones who are really serious. We know who are the ones who will not be defied by cheap answers and spin, who actually show up. So thank you for risking your lives to just come and hear Heather McPherson and myself this morning.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Can I just ask just a question on a totally different topic?
Sure.
The Canada Water Agency, that was mentioned once again in the throne speech. Do you see the establishment of this new agency as an opportunity to really tackle this important issue about whether it's water safety, whether it's the future of water given climate change, whether it is, access to clean water in northern communities like yours? Do you have any thoughts on what the mandate of this agency should be? I know I'm putting you on the spot here, but, it seems...
So they promise a lot of things in this speech.
I think what we really have come to understand, seeing what happens on the ground, is that it doesn't matter how many agencies and commissions Ottawa establishes, unless there's actually powers to ensure accountability, then this will be just another in a long line of failures. When you're looking at communities like Neskantaga, like Attawapiskat, where government can't ensure simple access to clean water amidst some of the most beautiful lakes in the world, there's a huge failure. In terms of the climate crisis, water will become one of, I think, the fundamental issues, either from flooding or from drought. I would like to see this this water agency actually have some teeth to be able to launch investigations, to examine where the problems are, and to have accountability mechanisms that they could bring to Parliament in the way that we would, say, with one of the parliamentary officers. So if the government's willing to do that, which I doubt, we will be fully on board. If it's just another agency, we already got a lot of them. Thank you.